What's good, NBA YouTube? It's your man, 100 Grand, Ross with The Rock Never Stops, coming to you with another episode within my series, My Favorite Thing About Your Favorite NBA Team. We're on the Memphis Grizzlies. The Memphis Grizzlies. My favorite thing, without question, about this squad is Ja Morant. Ja Morant. I'm going to be real with you. Ja is like the love child between Russell Westbrook and Chris Paul. He's incredible athleticism with poise, a high basketball IQ, and team first mentality. It's not to say that Russell Westbrook doesn't play team first basketball. It's just he really doesn't know how to do it. Like he's still figuring that out. He's like ultra selfless until the game gets close and tight, and then he doesn't seem to know what to do with himself. But imagine taking that raw athleticism and tenacity and then combining that with the poise of a Chris Paul. That's Ja Morant. The same Ja Morant who I believe led the NBA and I want to say fourth quarter or crunch time scoring and field goal percentage. Yeah, he was that dude. He was that dude. Almost dragged his team into the playoffs without their second best player, Jaren Jackson Jr., who came on late in the year after being out with the torn meniscus recovering. And I got to say, the Memphis Grizzlies did the right thing by resting Jaren Jackson Jr. And it was a close tie between Jaren Jackson and Ja Morant to see who I valued more, who I thought was going to be the person that I'm really looking out for, that was going to be my favorite thing about this roster, about this team this coming season. But Ja Morant honestly takes the cake for me. What's his name? West, the NBA logo. I forget his first name. But Mr. West, he was quoted during the draft where there was Zion Williamson and Ja Morant. And he said the best player that's going to come out of this draft is Ja Morant. That's what he said. Mr. West, Mr. Front Office, Mr. Can do no wrong, knows what he's doing. If he's in your organization, you're headed in the right direction. When the Warriors wanted to turn things around, who did they go get? Mr. West. When the Clippers want to turn things around, who did they bring in? Mr. West. He's got the magic touch. He's got the eye. He sees it. And he called out Ja Morant over Zion Williamson, knowing how talented, incredibly talented Zion is. And I agreed. I thought Ja was more built for this type of league. He's light, he's nimble, extremely athletic, and he can run all day. He's the type of player that's going to age extremely well in the NBA. And when you look at how he's worked on his game, his shooting, and especially when you pay attention to this preseason, Ja Morant is shooting the ball at a much higher clip from three. But it's not just that he's shooting it at a higher clip. He has a more of a aggressive killer mentality that he's trying to almost take over the whole game from beginning to end. Like he's looking to impose his will like we saw Russell Westbrook look to do all the time at the beginning of his career. And this is why I look at him as this like dual player between Westbrook and Chris Paul because Chris Paul, if you listen to him in his comments, he always kind of has this sentiment. He's like, look, I get my teammates involved early in the game because I want to make sure that towards the end of the game in the second half, they feel confident, they're in a rhythm, and they're a threat. And so when I turn it on, I'm turning it on with everyone else. LeBron James is very similar, right? Those have a high basketball key. If you know you can turn it on at any time, then you're also smart enough to know that it's better for you to bring your team with you and get them going early. So by the time you turn it on, the defense has to respect them as much as you, or at least close to it. And John Morant had this figured out early in his career as well. A very humble player, but extremely talented player. His background, if you are not sure about it, he was a player that was not highly recruited out of high school. Kind of has that John Wall type story, except didn't go to a major program. But he Basically was kind of like this slow to emerge player, extremely thin, but his athleticism was just absurd. And when you saw him, I believe it was in his sophomore year. I mean, towards the end of his freshman year, like you saw it, but his sophomore year, he exploded, averaging over 20 points a game, over 10 assists, led his team to the NCAA tournament, had a great showing there, and took off into the draft. But when you've watched the team, he's been trying to put the team first almost his whole career so far, the first few years. But the reality is, they need him to be a superstar. They actually need him to be more the West than Chris Paul. They don't just need him to be the closer and facilitator. They don't just need him to be the leader and the guy that makes everyone better. They need him to be the man who changes the entire complexity of the game from beginning to end. That's what it's going to take to get this team into the playoffs and to start whispering, can they be a contender? Right now, we're just whispering, we think they can be a playoff team. We really believe it. The past 2 seasons, they've been right there in the play in tournament. But I believe this is the year where they're saying, Ja, we need you to be the player you are at the end of games, closing it out for us. We need you to be that the whole game. We need you to put so much pressure on the defense, it makes it easy on our offense. The reality is they can't depend upon Jaren Jackson Jr. to stay healthy. Hasn't been healthy his first 3 years and going into his fourth year into a contract year. I'm expecting him to have a big year because it's a contract year. We all know how that works out. Players want to be at their best to show their maximum value to really get that bag. But the reality of it is they can't depend on him. So if he's great, great. But who's been showing up game in and game out? Ja Morant. Who's been the closer? Ja Morant. Who's been the leader? Ja Morant. Who's been the guy the other teams have had the game plan for the most? Ja Morant. And so when I think about this team, when I think about the Memphis Grizzlies, I'm gonna be honest. I like the roster. I like the supporting squad. I like the coach. He's solid. You know what I mean? He's not spectacular, but he's solid. You know what I'm saying? Got him to the playoffs last year. That's why I almost forgot. They did make it to the playoffs last year. I believe they played the Utah Jazz. I think they got one game, and they were kind of a hobbled Utah Jazz. But even then, you saw the supporting cast was all right. It was solid. It was solid, but it wasn't enough. Plain and simple, it was not enough. It was not. Jonas of Valanciunas, talented player. Kyle Anderson, slow mo, great player. I mean, not great player, but great role player. One of those plus minus, stat geek, nerd out on basketball, all-star players that everybody loves because of how well he plays on teams. He just makes everything run smoothly. Desmond Bain was due for this move into the starting lineup that we're all waiting on. Dylan Brooks, he'll be all right, very tough-minded player, kind of has that Draymond Green feel, but not really a dominant scorer. He's not really the person you want having the most shot attempts at the end of games. He's really like your third, fourth option at best when it comes to being a playoff team. I love his confidence, but that's not who you want him to be. You don't want him to be that second or first option. And so when you come into this season, there's one player that's on our mind, and that's Mr. Morant. That's Mr. Come see me. That's Mr. Come and get this bucket real quick. That's Mr. Watch out below. I'm on top. I'm about to bang on your head. Now you see me, now you don't. Come and get mixed up. Can't do nothing with me. Ja Morant. So if you like the video, please consider subscribing. Throw some comments. I enjoy doing these. It's just for the love, just for the love. Um, if there's any videos that you would like me to do, feel free to be like, yo, check this out. Or maybe you can share some insight on this. And I got you. I got you. But definitely put some comments. I always comment back. Until then, get at me. Peace.